I am feeling almost a little apologetic for straying from my usual Israel updates, which are at times a little witty, humorous, but I'm talking with friends, and many of you know the characters that I'm going to be mentioning. It's been a tough few days for the Fader family. And tonight, as it's 8 o'clock here, I have a mixed focus. Life often presents us with a mixed set of emotions due to events. In an hour, 3 people I love will be at Ben Gurion Airport, taking off. Batya is so excited, and I'm so excited for her to be coming for 5 days to Toronto to celebrate with the Kavaris, a simcha. And that's pretty amazing, the sense of feeling that she has and pushing herself to go. And that's how strong the feeling is. And then on a different flight will be my Uncle Chaim and Auntie Reet, who many of you will remember. And they're on their way to Florida for a sad reason. A number of years before my dad left us, he would have been 91 this week, we were walking. And at the time, both of his younger brothers were suffering from medical issues. And my father voiced his genuine feeling. And I won't say it as bluntly as he, the rabbi, did. He said, "It should be me. I'm the eldest." Chaim, thank God, is good. But my Uncle Jerry, who turned 85 last week, has reached the last moments of his struggles with dementia and complications. Chaim yesterday reflected on the phrase my father used even when Chaim turned 71. He would refer to him as his kid brother. And Chaim shared there are pluses to being the youngest, but not when it means I'll be left alone without my brothers. Achai, a word we've used in the last few weeks, Achi, my brother. Chaim and Irit were with Jerry and my Aunt Lolly a few months ago. They weren't sure that Jerry recognized them as brother and sister-in-law, but they knew that he knew that this is somebody, 2 people that he knew. But what was very clear, and I know you won't be surprised because we hear these stories, it was Sukkot, and Chaim, for the hell of it, started singing Kiddush and some Zmirot. And Jerry started to sing along. What happens in childhood, and the 3 brothers grew up in a household of Zmirot and blessings and rituals, will last a lifetime. I wish Batya a wonderful time, and I wish Chaim and Irit and the family strength. Thank you for letting me be able to share that. Now, children and our expectations, our hopes, our beliefs that they can heal this lousy world we've given them. We'll do this in 2 parts, this week and next week. I need you to respond to the questions that I'm going to ask. Feel free, please. We know there are no right or wrong, but to get us into this very necessary last part of a year that we've spent on the ills of society and voices toward healing. The first 2 questions, and respond to either one. What's your favorite thing to do with a child? What's your favorite thing to do with a child? And what do you enjoy most about your time with a child, even as an observer? Please, don't think too much.
Reading stories and watching him read stories.
It
Okay.
depends on the age, Bracha.
Well, we're talking young. I know that even if you're 65, you're somebody's child, but we're talking about young children.
Bracha, my favorite thing, and I'm experiencing this very much with my favorite granddaughter, and I can say that because I only have one. I always tell her that I love her, but one of the things that I love most about her is the questions that she asks me, because she's constantly curious about the things that are going on around her.
Okay, yeah. Gloria.
My favorite part, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Saturday night after Shabbos, I speak to my daughter and my granddaughter in Sydney, Australia. And it's breakfast time there. So she's at the breakfast table. And after I ask her what she's eating, I say, and how was your week? How did things go? And she's very modest. And her mother has to prompt her a little bit to say, well, you won this prize and you stood in this class, because that's the kind of kid she is. They're very modest about it. But she tells me all of her activities and shows me what she's drawn during the week and so on. And at the end of it, she says, oh, it's time to say goodbye. Love you, Bobby. That makes my week.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I like
I see a lot of
do.
Esther.
I had my 3 kids in 3.5 years, and
Oh,
I especially
Wow.
wanted them close together because I loved to watch them interact and play. They were so fascinating. And even now, as they're older, I love to watch them interact. I find them fascinating.
Are all of them in Israel or just Eric?
No, just Eric and the family, but we get together, and I was blessed that all of my kids and grandchildren, except for 2 who couldn't leave Israel at the time, last August were here for a month, and I had all that time with them. It was fantastic.
Great, thank you.
Today they choose always to cook with me, which is interesting.
Okay, somebody else. I'm looking at a lot of grandparents. I'm going to tell you, Etta.
I love listening to them. Just listening to them interact, just listening to them talk, ask questions, tell me about their day. Just listening to them. I just like to sit back and watch them.
Yeah.
I love baking and cooking with them.
Okay.
I feel very strongly about passing on those traditions. I think that it links one generation to the next.
Absolutely.
And I feel truly blessed because I love watching them interact with my mother as well. So they interact with grandparents and with a great grandmother. And that's a blessing.
Yeah, for sure.
When the children were small, the grandchildren were small, I loved to sing to them. Any songs, whether they were just childhood songs or something more adult, it didn't matter, because the sound of the singing would very often perk up the infant or the child.
Yeah.
And it was
For
my
sure.
pleasure.
For sure. Shirley Ann, come on.
I love hugging my grandchildren and they love hugging me. And it's the most wonderful feeling. I love cooking with them, baking with them, and I love playing sports with them.
Sports.
Soccer,
Terrific.
tennis, yeah.
Good for you. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, we have a difference.
Norman.
We have a different group. We're honored and blessed to having 5 great grandchildren.
Wow.
And there's no way we can go out and play games or do this and that. And basically what happens is every time we come over or they come to us, the first thing we try to do is make them smile. And it's just special. Very special.
It is. It is. You don't look like a great grandfather. I mean, I'm sure you're a great grandfather, but you don't look, you know what I mean?
I
Okay.
know. Thank you.
Okay. All right. My next question, which is a little different on the same topic, not that it negates what you've just said. It probably includes, for sure, what you just said. What is the most important thing you do or you did for your little child? What is the most important thing you did for your child as they were growing up? Think for a moment.
Okay, are you talking about children or grandchildren?
Well, it can be children, if you can remember that far back, Marlene, haha. And it can certainly be, if you have, and I'm sure you do, have a presence with your grandchildren, if you're giving them something, it might be interesting to see if you would say that they're 2 different things, depending on if it's a child or a grandchild.
Well, I've always felt that every child needs an adult outside of their parents with whom they can have conversation. And I've always tried to be that person in my grandchildren's life whom they feel that they can come and talk to when they don't necessarily want to talk to their parents, or when they want to share something that their parents might not be 100% happy with them doing.
And then you're put in a tough spot. I don't
Never.
want to get off topic, but that's an interesting.
I wanted to say, I think the most important thing that I hope I've done was to convey a sense of love of family and enjoyment of being together. And that goes to our extended family, and then that the children just have conveyed that to their children, and it's everybody just cherishes that.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, are you on mute? I think.
Yeah. My daughter and son-in-law bought a house in Newmarket recently.
Mazel tov.
And thank you. They sold their house on October 19th, and they just got the keys yesterday to Newmarket. So there was a 6 weeks in between. So they had nowhere to go.
You're still looking good. I know what you're about to say.
So when they told me that it was going to cost over $9,000 for that period, I think it was only for a month, to rent an Airbnb, I just could not say, well, good luck to you. So I said, well, you have to move in here. So they've been with us for the last 6 weeks, and it has been somewhat interesting.
That's a nice.
But they are going to sleep at their new place this Friday. and I think we're going to miss them. Oh, they have a dog as well.
Mm.
So it's, I mean, you learn things that you didn't know before, and some of them aren't that good, but all in all, I think it was a good experience for all of us. It's just my husband and myself who live in the, where we live. And we've been here 36 years because my daughter was born in, while we moved to this house. So last night when I said goodnight to my granddaughter, she said, Bubby, I would like you and Zadie to come for a sleepover. We're gonna buy a bed for you, and I think you should come and sleep at our place, and we'll play games and have a good time.
How sweet.
So that really touched me.
That sums it up.
Yeah.
Two things: that she enjoyed being with you,
Yeah.
and you modeled hospitality for her.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think it was a good experience, all in all.
Okay. Anybody else care to share? Okay. Gloria, go ahead.
And I don't want to monopolize, but something has resonated with me since my daughter was 3 years old. And that I've told that story many times to many people. When she was about 3, I don't know, we were doing something in the house. I was busy doing something all day long. But mommy, why this? Why that? How does this come? Why does that come? All these questions. And I finally looked at her and said, Rebecca, why so many questions? So she put her hips and she looked at me and she said, how am I going to learn anything if I don't ever ask any questions? So PS, fast forward to my daughter's a PhD in psychology. Okay, end of story.
Yeah. I'll remember when Batu was about 3 and we're driving on Steeles between Bathurst toward Young. And there are these tall apartment buildings, and she looks up at the smoke coming out of the chimney and she goes, wow. And I thought, a little person finds something like that a wow.
Very true.
And that brings us to part of what we'll be talking about. Our tradition suggests a weekly ritual is key to meaningful parenting. Birkat Yiladim, blessing our children, which I know many of you, if not all, regularly do. And it's a masoret, a tradition that is based on what I'm about to share. Just give me a sec. These verses from the Torah. Speak to Aaron and his sons. Thus shall you bless the people of Israel. Say to them, the Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and graciously with you. The Lord bestow the Lord's favor upon you and grant you peace. Thus they shall link my name with the people of Israel, and I will bless them. So this was a blessing meant for all of the Israelites. And later on, it was adapted to familial ritual. Professor Abigail Orman says that this act serves as a necessary reset. What does she mean by that? Reset. Let's look at the blessing. Remember, we say this after a full week of the mundane. For boys, Yisimcha Elohim ke Ephraim uch Menashe. May you be like Ephraim and Menashe. And for girls, Yisimech Elohim ke Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. And then the last part is for both. May God bless you and protect you. May God show you favor and be gracious to you. And may God show you kindness and grant you peace. Now, what does Orman mean when she says it's a necessary reset? During the week, you're busy. Everybody is busy running around, and you're involved with school issues, business issues. But when you had your children, you remember that you would be saying to them, no doubt, did you finish your homework? Why didn't you do that? Can the two of you kids stop arguing? And she said, you need to do that. That's part of being a parent. But also equally important is come Friday night that you say, I'm going to focus on all the wonderful qualities that my child has. An essential act. And when we concentrate on that, that's giving much to a child toward their development. Now, we will next week talk a little bit more about why it's necessary in our tradition to have these brachot and these rituals and not just leave it up to the whim of a parent. Okay, that'll be next week. So now, I want to share with you the reflections of 3 women regarding this Friday night blessing. And I'll want to hear how you feel about each, because they are different from each other. Now, you know that when I bring these contemporary texts, I read them as if we were reading Tanakh or Talmud, read very closely. And I'm telling you right now that some of them are a little longer than usual, but they're important to get the gist of what each of them is saying. So the first one, by this Professor Orman. By engaging in this ritual and in many of our other Jewish observances, we are also supporting our kids' emergent spirituality. And our claim, obviously, by next week is going to be spirituality, et cetera, is going to help our child heal this world. In her book, The Spiritual Child, Lisa Miller explains that children who have meaningful and robust spiritual lives thrive relative to their peers. They are more optimistic, happier, flexible, and are better equipped to handle life's inevitable twists and turns. Miller is unequivocal about a parent's role in this. Parents, she contends, are ambassadors of transcendence, the guides on the ground who introduce a child to the spiritually attuned life. While recognizing that children's spiritual development can happen outside religion, for sure, and often does, it regularly occurs through shared religious practice.
Thank you.
This Friday night ritual then can be a powerful instrument in our parenting toolbox, a weekly opportunity to foster our children's spiritual connections and an intimate reminder of God's presence in the world. Now, why is it so important for a child to be aware of God's presence in the world if that's going to foster caring on his or her part toward the world? We know already, it gives us, whether child or adult, a certain attitude toward others and ourselves. I'm not the end all. Now, the second, Marcia Falk, who is a literature professor and writes poetry and also has a background in Jewish thought. The custom of blessing one's children on the eve of the Shabbat is an especially tender moment in Jewish ritual life. She likes the ritual. The actual content of the blessing, however, is puzzling. Does anybody have a sense of why she sees the content as puzzling?
I think it's about who the children are actually blessed to become like. It's a crazy sentence, but when I was reading this again, I wondered, why pick Ephraim and Manasseh? Why not pick Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then pick, if you're picking the mothers, which are part of the blessings, why did you not pick the fathers to be part of the blessing?
Okay, I appreciate your questions, which we will address. Anybody else? There were two parts to Marlene's question. Anybody? Okay, well, Marlene, if I understood, I think was asking, as Marcia Falk did, why hope that a child will be like Ephraim and Manasseh and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. But in fact, more than that, beyond what Marlene said, she's going to ask, why ask that they be like any ancestors at all? Now, why does she have a problem with that? If we go on, in all its specificity, the blessing seems restrictive rather than expansive. Why? Why would she see it that way? She says, if you're telling your children that we want you to be like them and like them, then we're almost saying you don't have the possibility of whatever you want to be. That's how she's reading this. Indeed, I go back to the text. Why should we wish for a child to be anything other than her or his best self? Not living one's own life, not being true to the unique configuration of gifts and potential that nourish the self from within is a tragedy. You remember the story of Zusia, Reb Zusia. He's nearing his death and his students are looking at him and he looks very sad. And they say, what are you thinking about? And he says, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm going to meet my creator shortly.
Sure.
And I think that he's going to ask me, why were you not you? Why did you try to be like Abraham and Yitzchak? You should have been you, Zusia. So what does Marcia do with that? She says, instead of saying like Ephraim and Manasseh, I bless my son and I say, be who you are. Heye asher tihiyeh, which I understand as the ultimate expression, the very model of authentic being. Now, keep that in mind unless somebody wants to also say how you feel about that. Anybody want to respond actually to what Marcia said here? Do you have a response to her? Do you like the way she's thinking? Because
Personally-
when Marlene spoke, she wasn't suggesting that you don't say anybody. She was just questioning why those particular people, and we'll get to that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm Michael. I'm not crazy about her response.
Go ahead, Michael.
Understanding the reason we chose Menashe and Ephraim is because these are two kids who were Jewish kids who were brought up in a totally different society in Egypt with no other Jews around except their dad, and they stayed Jewish.
Yeah.
So we have the same forces of assimilation here. We're not trying to limit them in any way. We're just trying to say, we're hoping, like Ephraim and Menashe, that in this great society that is so open and you have so many choices, we hope you're going to stay Jewish.
Yafeh.
So I would never leave that out ever.
Okay. All right. I agree. And that's all that matters. Sorry. Okay. So, anybody else?
Bracha, can you hear me? It's Helen.
Yes.
I
Helen.
know we're in a noisy environment, but I think
I
that-
appreciate that you joined us from wherever you are. I heard you were going on an
Okay.
outing.
I think her approach is a little too Me Too-ish for my liking. I think children need to know there are role models. And I think they have to look, their strength comes from looking at the positives in others that you reinforce and say, these are good things for you to take.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I think that Michael was right on. The fact is that these kids grew up in a non-Jewish environment and they maintained their Judaism. And that to me is the crux of it. And I think Michael was right on.
Michael, if you don't know who's speaking, that's Simone. Okay, you should shake her hand the next time you see her. Okay. And she's left Norman to go on this outing, but Norman spoke up without you, Simone. Okay. So that is indeed one of the reasons. Let's look and see what is another. Just before Jacob died, I'll just read this part quickly because Michael just said it. He called all his sons for a final blessing. As a special reward to Joseph, who remained righteous throughout his ordeal of exile. He's Ephraim and Menashe's dad. And we know that Joseph, and interesting enough, you know, when Potiphar's wife was trying to seduce Joseph, the Midrash tells us that the reason that he did not succumb was because of this image that he had of his father. All right, he made an impact. Okay. And yes, gives them a special blessing as well as 2 portions of the land of Israel. We don't have to read that. And Jacob's blessing was that they should be a blessing, an example to the Jewish people, as Helen just said, for all time. From that day forward, they would become role models for Jewish children everywhere as they represented qualities to emulate eternally. Now, this adds something to what Michael just said. Ephraim and Menashe, and I purposely left it blank, were the first brothers among our forefathers to live without
Animosity.
sibling rivalry. Okay, so there you go, Marlene. Those are 2 reasons why Ephraim and Menashe. Okay, now let's get to Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Some of you might be familiar with Lori Palatnik, who grew up in Toronto. I can't believe I almost forgot. Who grew up in Toronto and now lives in Washington with her husband. They're part of Aish. And this is what she goes on to say. She's written this text. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the mothers of the Jewish people, each one possessed unique qualities that played essential roles in the strength and future of the nation. Yet there was something they all shared, something that Jewish women for all time would strive to emulate. Each one lived in recognition that the ultimate in fulfillment is enabling others to fill in the blank. What did they all do, and not necessarily their husband? They recognized that the children had, each of them, their own strengths, and perhaps this one was geared for this task and the other for another task. And they also were so aware of the need to foster a commitment to Am Yisrael. Okay, now, listen to these three words: Torah, Morah, and Horah. They sound very similar, don't they? Torah, Morah, Horah. We know what Torah is. Morah, teacher. Horah, parent. Parents and teachers, like the Torah, instruct and hopefully enlighten. But we must never forget that we can also learn from our children. And a few of you referred to that earlier. What are wonders of childhood that if only we could hold on to? Deborah Ornstein, another Jewish educator, says the following: our daydreaming children can focus on a single blade of grass with a relaxed awareness that it would take an adult practicing Jewish meditation years to master. We might say that the first rule of Jewish parenting is a lo ta'aseh mitzvah. It's a prohibition. You shall not squelch. We must deliberately protect children's natural affinity for ritual, limits, repetition, consistency, nature, empathy, marking time, music, spirituality, and the present moment. All good for them and also good for the Jews, and I would add ultimately for the world. Now, the following is a pair of values that applies in parenting. The pair can be seen as two ends of a continuum, two principles held in tension or even a paradox: presence and perspective. The twin values of presence and perspective reflect children's innate wisdom and their need for guidance. Both are real. By presence, I mean the spiritual disposition and life skill of relating to the present moment. I'm not thinking about the past. I'm not caring how this is going to impact the future. I am just in that moment. Infants are experts, transitioning from moment to moment and from mood to mood with little or none of the looking forward, backward, and projecting forward that adults tend to do. Some of what we label dawdling, you know, you come in and you watch and you see your child just sitting there or playing with pieces of paper or not paying attention, in older children might better be called exploring and engaging in the world, or paying precise attention to something else. We're too quick. You know, you go into a child's room and you see they've made this, they've made that, you find things in their drawers, and you wonder what's going on here, but you don't know. Maybe they were imagining something. Maybe they were dreaming of something. That's got to be fostered. But perspective is also important. That comes from the parent. Perspective complements presence. It sees beyond the present moment. Perspective is a specialty of elders because it is developed and enhanced through life experience. Children need maximal guidance. Elders, and there's a difference between guidance and telling them to stop. Elders can provide children with a context to see their problems and even their triumphs in perspective. Rituals, in contrast to blessings, point out the long view. The circumcision ceremony looks back to Abraham and Isaac, forward to the baby's marriage. The Pesach Seder begins with our ancestors as displaced slaves and idolaters, and culminates with the hopeful cry, next year in Yerushalayim. As our children grow and participate in these rituals, they get a sense of the sweep of history and the possibility for change and repair. And that takes us back to Marshall Falk and what Michael and Simone said. Nothing in that bracha is limiting them. It is giving them a sense of there are role models, including people alive today. And it gives a sense we're in a world that relates to the past and hopes for the future. And the trick is to balance. You let David be David, but he is a descendant of Abigail. Now, on the other hand, parents face a dilemma. A professor of mine, Zichrono Livracha, Michael Rosenak, reflects. We want the child to remain curious, to ask questions, and to be open to others. But he's curious, when should we introduce our children to the real world? And obviously this ties in with what would be the best strategy to keep them childlike, but prepare them to confront the world and to hopefully find a cure. And he says the following: parents face a serious dilemma when they struggle to make their children into curious and open human beings, comfortable with exploration, and oriented to encounter with others. Open people, say educational psychologists, have learned to believe that the world is basically good. They expect it to be friendly. Their tendency is to trust others and to offer them goodwill and even affection. Conversely, research indicates that those who perceive the world as evil, cruel, and untrustworthy tend to be suspicious and disinclined to enter into relationships, which they have come to see as potentially dangerous. So you see the dilemma. Do we want to create children, people who trust the outsiders? Or do we have to make them aware that they might be disillusioned because they might be disappointed by some of these encounters? So when do we start? Before we go on, would anybody care to suggest? Because this is a very real issue. And I have a specific example that will help us think about this, but I'm curious as to what you would say before we do that. How long do you keep a young child or a child living as if all is wonderful? And remember, we're thinking of the child, and we also have to be thinking ahead the role that that child will have later on in life. Now, that doesn't mean that the child as a child isn't significant in a role, and we'll get back to that more next week also. So anybody, do you have a sense? Sometimes, unfortunately, a child doesn't choose to, and we don't choose to, and they face the real world and terrible things. But let's say it doesn't happen. When would you introduce them to the reality of the world, of things, let them know what's going on or what went on? That's pretty ugly.
I don't think there's an age. I think it depends on the child. I'll give you a very cute example. I have two beautiful granddaughters that are about 3 years apart. And when the older one was, I believe, around 6, when I felt that she could comprehend, she always heard the Purim story as the Haman wanted to send the Jewish people away. And I felt that she could handle this. And I said, you know, sweetheart, I want to tell you the actual truth now. And Haman wasn't going to send the Jewish people. He wanted to kill them all. And then later on, when I told her little sister, I said, I'm going to tell you the story of Purim. The big one said, she said, Zadie, hold on. Make sure it's little kid appropriate. That's what she said to me. And it just, you know, it was so beautiful because she could understand, and she knew at that age that her little 3-year-old sister shouldn't be told that. And even though she was 6. So that's why I say, I don't think there's an age. I think it's, you have to look at the child and decide what they're able to grasp.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Linda.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. I don't think there's an age. What I think is very key, though, is to have very good open lines of communication and a sense of trust between you and the child, so that when you tell them, they feel secure in what you're telling them. And that helps with that foundation.
Very important. How you sound is very important.
And their relationship to you as trusting you.
I think absolutely. And the trusting also is that you, together with, and we'll get into this also next week, together with you telling them something that might be horrific, you also try to give them a sense that there will be light. Anyone else? Thank you both. No? Okay. So I happened to be listening to a discussion about teaching the Shoah, and in a handout, this was given. And this is a concrete example of answering this question. In the first, there are 3 schools of thought about this question when we introduce our child to the real world. And this happens to be discussing the Shoah. And it could be other things as well. In the first school of thought are those who argue that early childhood should be a protected time, a time when adults need to shield the curious minds of children from the harsher aspects of the world they inhabit. This group tends to argue that teaching the Shoah to youngsters is also developmentally inappropriate. Young minds are simply not sophisticated enough to comprehend the complexities of the Holocaust, and young hearts are not well equipped to tackle the enormity of this tragedy. Why risk giving children nightmares needlessly? This group asks, when the students are old enough and more mature, they will be ready to learn, and until then, we shouldn't teach about it. Now, getting back to what Michael said, there are people in their 20s that would also have nightmares. So that's one school of thought. In the second group are those who claim that it is the duty of adults to teach children, even young children, about the Holocaust. While children cannot fully comprehend its complexities, they can nonetheless begin to learn about it in a simplistic fashion. This group's proponents tend to agree with the educator Jerome Bruner, the educational theorist, who believed that there is an appropriate version of any skill or knowledge that may be imparted at whatever age one wishes to begin teaching, however preparatory the version may be. Kids can be taught what racism is, for example, or how important it is to speak up when someone is being hurt. In other words, kids can be taught about the social dynamics at play during the Holocaust as a way to prepare them for learning about its specific history in greater depth later. These proponents consider it better for students to be ushered into Holocaust knowledge slowly than not to be exposed to it at all. Otherwise, kids will be utterly unprepared for its horrors when they do encounter the Holocaust later. And in a third group are those who advocate teaching young children about the Holocaust without intellectually simplifying or emotionally minimizing its tragic content. According to this argument, it is the unenviable role of teachers sometimes to confront their students with the horrors of the world, the Holocaust among them. And it is better for kids to learn about the Holocaust for the first time from adults who can shape the experience carefully and caringly than for kids to learn about the Holocaust for the first time randomly from a television show, older kids in sensitive renderings, or widely circulated rumors. As the Holocaust survivor Batsheva Dagan puts it, today's children grow up in a world without secrets, better than to help them navigate what they will learn about anyway. Any comments about these three schools of thought? Anyone?
I don't think there's one rule. I think
Okay.
it depends on the child. It depends on the family situation. It depends on the context that they're living in. So I think a parent has to be sensitive to the needs of the child and also try and combine realism with hope.
And that's what we will focus on next week. How do we do that? How do we do that? How do we do that? Anyone else? Thank you, Linda.
Bracha, I want to go back to your actual question.
Brilliant.
My group put on a play in 2017, and it had an episode about the Holocaust within. And I invited a lot of my grandchildren, and several of the younger ones, I guess they were about 8, one was 8 and one was 9, and they were severely affected by it. And I was sorry that I actually brought them because they were too young. And so the third example says, well, we should teach them no matter what their age, and they will learn to understand. But I think that there is an age when you can teach in a way that they do understand, but not fully that it's going to be too upsetting and shocking for their emotional system.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, if you don't know this, I've known teachers, not many, but before perhaps there was stricter supervision, sometimes a teacher would bring in a video to take up time. And I heard once of a particular teacher bringing in one of the versions of the Chana Senesh story. And I knew which one she used for a grade 4 class. It was cause for dismissal, showing because one was very graphic. Do you remember when we used to watch as children Holocaust movies? They were very, very explicit. Bodies on bodies. That's not to be done anymore. You know, Facing History and Ourselves in Boston wrote a lot about that, and that it just paralyzed us. You at one point have to know about that, but that isn't necessarily what you show, certainly at certain ages. Thank you, Shirley-Ann. Anyone else? Go ahead.
My son's boyfriend, little boyfriend, when they were all of 8 years old, said, come to the camp I went to last year. I love it. I love it. And off he went for his few weeks of summer camp and came back angry, this 8-year-old, that he had been shown these horrific films at summer camp on the Holocaust. And he said, I was too young, Mom. I was too young to see this. And he was quite horrified, and he was angry. He wasn't having nightmares of fright. He was angry. He wasn't ready, and he knew it. I said,
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tzipora. Anyone else? Abe?
In a few weeks, we're going to be talking about the 4 sons. And the 4 sons exemplify how you're supposed to teach your children. Each one according to his ability, each one according to his senses, each one to where maybe age is a factor in that, maybe it isn't. But it spells it out very clearly. We don't have to look for that answer.
Beautiful, Abe. Beautiful. Al pi darko, according to his way. And some will say that actually the Rasha, the contrary child, is not necessarily the most difficult. She's involved in the discussion. So to sum up, we believe that our parenting is very, very important in what we try to give to our children as preparation for their lives. There will come a point that they will decide what they do with what we've given them. But as children, young children, we bless them, and there are plenty of times that we give them their own individual blessing, even if it's in our own words. But certainly, we do have certain hopes. And our hopes that they be like Ephraim and Menashe and Sarah, Rivka, Rachav, Leah, it's not to be those exact people, but to take from them, just as they'll take from us, certain qualities, and then they go on to incorporate that into their own lives. Now, why it's important that we decide how long we let them live in a carefree world, we hope we wish it could be forever. But I think it's to say that it is our responsibility to find ways to prepare them, not just to face the troubles that we know, unfortunately, they're going to face, but how to face them. Like, am I going to be totally open? Or is that going to cause me great disappointment? When do we start letting them know what the real world is? But somebody just said it, but we give them a sense of security, that we've given them something to let them be able to face these challenges. And certain things will remain forever if we give it as a basis. I know I can go back to my Friday night table. I will always have those mirot with me that my uncle recognized. One of the favorite Hanukkah children's songs is Banu Choshech Legaresh. We have come to expel darkness. Biyadenu Orveish, in our hands is light and fire. Kol Echad Hu Or Katan, each one of us is a small light. The Kulanu Or Eitan, but all of us together create a strong, strong light. So may we be together so that we can create that strong light and feel it. And have a good week. I have to make sure Bach is at the airport. So I'm going to say Chag Sameach and be well.
You too, Bracha. Chag Sameach.
Sameach.
To you. And Sia Tova Bacha.
Sameach, and thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care.